How pissed do you think the producers of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver are that their piece on Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was locked before this dead bear cub story broke? I was watching the new episode of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver, and did I need to tell you that? Or did you just assume that I never miss an episode of that show the first time you saw me? Are any of you surprised? Are any of you about to turn to your partner and say, honey, the 40-something cishet white guy I watch on YouTube is a dedicated viewer of John Oliver's HBO show. Can you believe it? Anyway, I was watching the new episode of John Oliver's show, on which the main story is all about RFK Jr., and I had that thought, damn, talk about the perfect nexus of great and terrible timing. They drop a show about RFK Jr. on the same day, yet another incredibly odd story about him breaks, but because their show is taped ahead of time, they didn't have time to include that new story in their story. Not that they were hurting for material on what a shit show of a candidate and a human being RFK Jr. is, but still, I'd be annoyed. If you don't know what I'm talking about when I say the dead bear cub story, briefly, it's this. Yesterday, Sunday, August 4th, 2024, as I sit here recording this, independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. posted a video to Twitter of himself in conversation with Roseanne Barr. And in that video, Kennedy claims that he was responsible for a dead bear cub that inexplicably appeared in Central Park in New York City in October 2014. As Kennedy tells it, he was heading out to go falconing one day when the car in front of him struck and killed a bear cub. The driver that killed the bear cub kept going, so Kennedy did what I'm sure any of us would do. He pulled over, picked up the dead bear cub, and put it in the back of his van, intending to skin it and put the meat in his refrigerator. Then he spent the day falconing. Then he went straight from there to a dinner in New York City, and then after the dinner, he had to go straight to the airport, and he realized he still had this dead bear in his van from this morning. So after discussing the situation with some of his drunk friends from dinner, RFK Jr. decided the best thing to do was to take the bear carcass, dump it in Central Park, and stage the scene with an old bicycle to make it appear that the bear had been killed following a collision with a cyclist. Let me pause right here. Before I go any further, I want to just sit with the plain facts of this story for a minute or two. Consider what I've just told you. 10 years ago, a dead bear cub was discovered in Central Park in New York City. This being a fairly unusual occurrence, it got a fair amount of media coverage in New York and beyond. Wild bears aren't known to live in Central Park. The bear, though found with a bicycle, was soon confirmed to have been killed after being hit by a car, meaning that investigators have always known the scene where the bear was found was artificially created by someone for some reason. For a decade, it remained a mystery, one of those odd occurrences that happen in cities the size of New York. Oh yeah, that dead bear in Central Park, I remember that. Whatever happened with that? Just that is already strange enough. Dead bear in Central Park, where bears don't live, found with a bicycle, but killed by a car. Then 10 years go by, and we get the solution to the mystery. The man responsible for placing that bear in Central Park comes forward and admits to it and tells the story, and he's a Kennedy. Not just a Kennedy, he's the son of Robert F. Kennedy. And he's not just the son of Robert F. Kennedy, he is also, at the very moment he's telling the story of the bear, running for president of the United States. And he's telling this story to Roseanne Barr. Is this real life? I haven't even gotten into what a fucking weirdo RFK Jr. is as an individual, or how the details of this story make him out to be an even bigger weirdo and even more of an ignorant dipshit and even more profoundly disconnected from reality than I already thought he was. Just the plain facts of the story are so utterly bizarre, if I didn't know it was true, I'd have a hard time believing it. Let's dig a little deeper into some of those details. RFK Jr. says his motivation for keeping the dead bear was that he wanted to skin it and put the meat in his freezer. When was he planning on doing that? He emphasizes in telling the story that the cub was killed right in front of him, and when he got to it, the carcass was still fresh, and in good condition. And he makes sure to say that in the state of New York, you're allowed by law to claim roadkill and eat the meat. Okay, fresh meat, nice and legal. But then he leaves the dead bear in his van all day while he goes falconing and all evening while he's having dinner in New York City. And he implies in telling the story in the video that the only reason he decided to abandon the carcass was because he wasn't going home from the dinner. He was headed straight to the airport. So if he didn't have to go to the airport that night, was his plan still to take the bear home and skin it and butcher it that night? Because here's the thing about that. Yes, New York State does allow you to claim roadkill and to eat the meat of that roadkill, but that law is meant for times when a driver strikes and kills an animal themselves. Just because it's legal doesn't mean it's a good idea to collect and eat an animal you found lying on the side of the road with no idea how it got there or how long it's been there. In RFK Jr.'s case, this wouldn't have been an issue since he says he saw the bear get hit by the car in front of him, except for the fact that after he picked up the bear, he left it to sit in his van all day. Just because you picked it up off the ground doesn't mean it's going to be safe to eat after rotting in your van all day, dude, you fucking dipshit. I don't talk about it much, but I used to go hunting with my father. When I was a teenager, Dad and I would go hunting, and sometimes my grandfather would come along. I don't talk about it much because I'm not proud of it. I don't really approve of hunting for sport anymore, especially trophy hunting. But even if you're planning on eating the meat, which I suppose is better than not eating it, I just don't think hunting should be something people do for recreation. But I'm the only member of my immediate family who thinks so, and I didn't come to think so until I was an adult. So as a teenager, I would sometimes go hunting, and it's because of that experience that I know that when you kill an animal, you don't just leave it to lie around and rot for hours and hours, not on the ground, not on the back of a truck. When we went hunting, it was standard practice to field dress killed game almost immediately, to remove the internal organs. Then, when we got back from the hunt, one of the first orders of business was to skin the game and hang it in the freezer. No one in their right mind would ever eat meat from an animal that had been lying around for hours without at least being field dressed. Dead animals begin to rot immediately. That's what that bear cub carcass was doing all day in RFK Jr.'s van, rotting. And apparently, he intended to take it home, skin it, and eventually eat it, and feed it to his family after it had been rotting in his van all day while he went falconing and spent the evening in New York City. Does he do this kind of thing often? If he does, we now have the solution to two mysteries: where that dead bear in Central Park came from and where that fucking worm in RFK Jr.'s brain came from. People were speculating that he got it during a trip to Africa or Asia or something. To hell with that. He got it at his house. He eats roadkill. Does anyone want seconds? Still plenty of bear steaks to go around. I found this one lying beside a hiking trail this morning. It was still warm to the touch, so it's probably fine. I left it sit in the back of my van all day before bringing it home. Tastes good, doesn't it? The secret ingredient is trichinosis. I'm not even done yet. While telling the story, RFK Jr., in trying to explain or justify his decision to dump the bear in Central Park, says, "This was a little bit of the redneck in me. Bobby, you're a Kennedy. There ain't no redneck in you. Your uncle was John Kennedy from Massachusetts, not John Kennedy from Louisiana." I don't think falconry is a popular activity in redneck circles. I've known my share of rednecks. Most of them have liked to hunt. Some of them hunt with a rifle, some with a shotgun, some with a bow, never with a trained bird of prey. The only time you're ever going to see redneck falconry is if someone's doing it with a rednecked falcon. Then Kennedy says that he decided to make it look like the bear cub had been fatally struck by a bicycle because at the time there had been a lot of bicycle accidents in New York City, and he thought whoever found the dead bear with the bicycle in Central Park would be amused by it. Yeah, Because there's nothing funnier than unexpectedly encountering a dead animal, is there? That's just pure comedy. A few months ago, I was mowing the grass and found a dead rabbit in my backyard, and I wasn't shocked or saddened or disturbed at all. I laughed my ass off about it, just like any well-adjusted, emotionally stable person would. Look at the tweet that RFK Jr. wrote when he posted this video. Looking forward to seeing how you spin this one, New Yorker. As if this story requires any spin. How psychologically unmoored, how lacking in self-awareness do you have to be to post a video of yourself telling this story and frame it by preemptively accusing a magazine of putting a negative spin on it? Those yellow journalists at the New Yorker, I just know they're going to take this video of me admitting to getting rid of a roadkill bear carcass I'd been hauling around in my van all day by staging a crime scene in Central Park because my original plan to eat it fell through, and use it to make me look bad. Check out Roseanne's face as RFK Jr. is telling this story. See the hint of, can you believe this shit, on her face, and realize, as I did, that she's the reasonable one in the room here. Roseanne Barr, 2024, MAGA-pilled, set her whole career and legacy on fire for Donald Trump. Roseanne Barr is the reasonable one. But of course she is. The only other person we see is Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Do you have any idea how emotionally and mentally checked out you'd have to be for you to not be the reasonable one next to RFK Jr.? You'd need to be nuttier than a squirrel turd. You've probably never heard that one, Bobby. It's a redneck expression. That's the most remarkable thing about Robert Kennedy Jr. No matter how batshit bonkers you think he is, there's always that story you haven't heard yet. And when you hear it, he somehow becomes even more batshit bonkers than you already thought he was. Before the bear cub story, before the brainworm story, he was an anti-vaxxer, he was an AIDS denialist, AIDS denialists, like presidential candidate and roadkill connoisseur Robert F. Kennedy Jr., believe that AIDS is not caused by HIV. There are 1,000 ways to know that this is an incorrect and deranged thing to believe, but here's the simplest one to me. For decades now, there have been drugs on the market which, if taken consistently and correctly, will prevent people with HIV from developing AIDS. These individual drugs work in different ways and do different things, but they all interact in some way with HIV. So if AIDS wasn't caused by HIV, why would the drugs that block and hinder HIV prevent people from developing AIDS? Do you have any idea how fucking wrong you have to be in order to be an AIDS denialist in the year 2024? Or to believe that vaccines, which have been tested and widely used in some cases for generations, are unsafe? Or to imply that COVID-19 was used by Jewish people to target Black and Caucasian people, which he did, even though he later denied that he meant to imply it. This guy's running for president! And he's got no chance in hell of winning, but in some polls, his support runs as high as 7%. And apparently, a lot of that is people whose second choice would be the Democratic candidate. Who is choosing to vote for RFK Jr. with Kamala Harris as their second choice? There are people in this country who would vote for Kamala Harris, but their preference is for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. How is that possible? How is this reality? How can such people exist in this world, walking among us? It's too weird. It's too strange. I don't think I can bear it. I know what I said. I'm not sorry.